Hello, everyone. Good evening. And I can see our attendees are now joining us. Thanks so much for sitting with us tonight and going through this really exciting webinar. We're thrilled to have with us some experts that are going to give us some insights about inclusion, which is just so important in our field. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Robin McMillan. I'm the innovator of projects, programs, and partnerships here at the Canadian Childcare Federation. And I should point out a few things about our webinar tonight. First of all, the title, as you can see on your screen, Getting Clear About Inclusion. It is part of a three-part series that we're doing with our colleagues at GRIT. They are independent, but certainly all about inclusion. So it's great if you can join us for all three, but if you can do one, that's great too, because they're standalone content. You will be muted during the webinar, and if you have a question, we want you to please just put it in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that and be able to respond to questions and concerns throughout the webinar. If it's about the technology or about a content question, that kind of thing, we're happy to answer them on the fly. I'm also pleased to have Suzanne Schlechte with me here today from the Canadian Childcare Federation. She's our Project Engagement Officer, so I'm going to pass it over to her, and then she's going to do her bit and then pass it over to our content experts this evening. So I will close off my screen and I will join you again after the webinar is at the end. Thanks. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Robin. So I'm just going to give our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which the CCCF is located is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We recognize all Indigenous people who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As Indigenous people have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all. Today, these lands continue to be shared territory and are occupied by many diverse peoples from near and far. A treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And now, Marilyn and Gina, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, it's a delight to be here across time zones and the whole country. I think this is probably one of the first online national workshops that I've done, and I'm so glad to be here with everybody. My name is Gina, and I am the professional learning lead at GRIT. So I've been with GRIT over 20 years, working directly with children with disabilities, coaching to ECEs in programs and day homes like yourselves around the practices that we're going to talk about over these next 3 workshops. And inclusion is such a big piece of my heart. So I enjoy learning alongside. This is not just Marilyn and I speaking to you, but you have experience as well. And so as we go through this evening, please do make sure to share your wisdom when we do the activities. Any comments and questions, Marilyn and I will do our best to answer them in the chat. And I will let her introduce herself before we get going.
Thanks, Gina. I'm also very excited to be here. So I'm Marilyn Armstrong, and I've also worked at GRIT for, well, a little bit longer than Gina, 25 years, but my role was very similar in terms of coaching and providing professional learning to educators on inclusive practices. So Gina and I both did that work in Alberta, and now I'm managing a project where we're working across Canada. So it's really exciting to be doing this national webinar with all of you. So welcome to the learning, and we're excited to get started with you all.
Yes. We typically do our own land acknowledgements, but it was so beautiful what Suzanne shared. But I do want to just link our land with all of the lands across the country, because we are all on different Indigenous lands, and Marilyn and I are coming to you from Treaty 6 in the city, the Cree name of which is Amiskwachie-Waskagan, colonially known as Edmonton. And so I love the juxtaposition, the fact that we're in a digital space, but we are all on physical land as well. And so I'm glad to be here with you wherever you are from where we are. Now, as we get started, I just want to let you know that our workshops are really meant to be interactive. So to the best of your ability, please do share your thoughts and insights. Our sharing is encouraged, but not forced, certainly. And we know that depending on what time zone you're in, you might still be eating supper. And so you're listening to us as you kind of refuel yourself, and that's okay. So make sure to take care of your needs as you need them so that you can be an engaged learner. We want to make sure that the space is respected, but respect yourself as well and your body and what it needs to learn. Maybe reduce any distractions that you have in your space, close a door, whatever you need to do. I'm just going to double check my phone is on silent.
Me too.
And take care of those self-care needs as well. And as we explore the topic of inclusion and belonging, this topic might trigger some uncomfortable feelings. We're going to challenge biases and assumptions a little bit, and we're going to, particularly in this workshop, think about our beliefs about inclusion. And so if you're experiencing any discomfort, or you're triggered by maybe some uncomfortable memories or experiences of your own, feel free to take a break from the computer, or reach out to a trusted family member and friend after the workshop, or send a direct message in the chat, and we will, one of us will co-regulate with you. So what are we talking about? Inclusion is a huge topic, and even in 3 one-hour presentations, we can't cover all of it. So each of these workshops is a starting place for your brain to think, what does this look like for me? We're looking at ECE programs and day home settings, and so there's lots of variety across the nation. So we're trying to speak to all of that, and everything we talk about applies, but you will have to think about, what does that look like for your specific room, for your specific home, for your specific program? And so we are looking at inclusion from that broad lens, but the conversation keeps going. You keep that conversation going. So today we're going to clarify the definition of inclusion. What is that, and how does it relate to early learning and education? And then we are going to look at describing some of those elements that really make up an inclusive culture. Like, where do we have to start to think to know that we are thinking kind of in that inclusive way? And then we're really going to look at what are some starting practices that will help us finish off. Like, what can I take back with me into my day tomorrow when I'm working with children and families? So what are some starting practices that really demonstrate that value of inclusion? So again, feel free to put comments or questions in the chat at any time. Chances are, if you have a question at a certain moment, we want to try and answer it as best we can in that moment when your brain is actively thinking about it. And I want to let you know too, we're talking about inclusion and the things that you can do in the mindsets that you might consider adopting or reflecting on. But we also recognize that there are lots of factors outside of your control in terms of supporting children and families, the supports that you have, some of the society's sort of beliefs around early learning and care. And we know that in the field of early learning and early childhood, there's a lot of burnout happening right now. And so we know that some of you are working against that as well and trying to take care of yourself. And everything we talk about tonight and in the workshops to come really do depend on healthy educators. You have to be your best to be able to do your best for children and families. So while none of this is impossible, we understand that it might feel really like we're asking you to do hard things or to consider hard things. If you're feeling burnt out, it might feel like something that's more difficult. But that could be a cue to say, what do I need so that I feel like I'm in a place where I can support children and families to the best of my abilities? So we know that that is a reality that you're working with as well. All right, let's get into it. So what's inclusion? There is not one shared definition of inclusion across schools, across early learning programs, across provinces. And so we're going to share GRIT. GRIT has been a leader in inclusive practice for over 40 years. So we feel our definition's pretty robust, but at the very least, we hope you'll see our definition clearly woven into the workshops as we go through. And we do feel that it sort of touches on the key pieces of inclusion. And the first is just that belief that we all belong. right? That we all, no matter our age, our ethnicity, our ability, our gender, we all belong. And all children have the right to participate in natural settings. So going to school where their brother and sister go to school, going to daycare where their brother and sister go to daycare, right? Being where other children their age are in those natural settings. We know that when children are included, that they really are active and valued participants in their family life, in their community, in school. And so it's a huge piece of a person's sense of self and their belonging and their life success. We know that when we start a child on a trajectory of inclusion, that they're more likely to be included over the lifespan. And while this definition applies to all of the different groups, some of which I just mentioned, right? Like age, gender, ethnicity, language, any groups of people that historically have been marginalized or are still marginalized. I want to be clear that this workshop and the next two, we are really focusing on inclusion as it relates to supporting children with disabilities, and that includes neurodivergence. So we're looking at kind of that intersection of inclusion, disability, and neurodivergence. But everything we're saying applies to those other intersections as well. All right, so if this is the definition, how are we currently doing? I was so excited to look at some really recent, like 2024 recent statistics across Canada of children with disabilities. And I don't know if it was shocking or not, but I'll share some of these with you. According to caregiver reports, so this went out to parents and primary caregivers of children, when they looked at their experiences in early learning and care settings, and they looked at childcare programs, they looked at day homes. There was another category they had as well, but across the different environments, they said that they noticed that 1 in 10 children with a disability has been denied a spot in a childcare program because of their condition. I just want to let that sink in for a minute. So 1 in 10. So chances are a child in your program has come from another program where maybe they were denied access because they have a disability or a neurodivergence. It's a lot of people. Now that's across all of the disabilities that they tracked. When you broke it down a little bit further, if you looked at physical disability, 1 in 4 children with a physical disability was denied access because of their condition. So that's motor, vision, hearing impairments, some of those really physical things. And you kind of get it, right? If your building's not accessible, if you're on the second floor of a shared office space and you don't have an elevator and a child's in a wheelchair, it definitely makes it hard. That's 25% of children. That's a lot. I'm looking here, there's 200 people here tonight. That's 50 people who wouldn't have been allowed access, right? That's a lot. And the same goes for children with emotional conditions. So they looked at like ADHD and anxiety and oppositional defiant disorder. So again, nearly 25% of those children are being denied access or have been at least once, according to their caregivers. And this is the opposite of inclusion. These statistics are not what we want, not really what we want to see. And I think there's often the responsibility of the child and the family to kind of figure it out, but it's not their responsibility. It's certainly not the child's responsibility at the age of 2 or 3 to fit themselves in and to make themselves fit into the system of early learning and care. And it's not the sole responsibility of families either. We have a role to play. And so we do want to look at our practices and the systems we operate in. And I think that's why most people are here this evening. You're recognizing, I want to make sure I'm doing inclusion well. And so you're taking the learning that can enhance that. So I'm so glad you're here, because it just tells me that you're the kind of educators that want to start turning these numbers around. So this workshop and the other two in this series are really going to invite you to consider things like, do I value inclusion? What are my beliefs about inclusion? Where am I doing inclusion well, right? And where maybe do I need to change or refine some of my practices? And where do I need more support from others? Because you're not alone. Even if you're in a day home and you operate, it's just you and 6 children, you shouldn't be alone. There should be some supports for you as well. And so who are those people? So those are some of the reflective questions to kind of keep in the back of your brain. So in terms of the definition of inclusion, let's also talk about where we've come from, because it's important to know where we've come from to help us determine where we're going. So this is the evolution of inclusion, and it starts on the far left with exclusion, right? This is the complete removal of anyone who's considered different. Those with perceived differences are kind of removed from the group that's seen as quote unquote normal or superior or better in some way. So historically, we see this in institutions for people with disabilities. We also see this historically in residential schools. So exclusion is a reality that has existed and still exists in some places around the world as well. And then we recognize that that's not really a way to treat people. So we started thinking about segregation, where those with perceived differences are kind of grouped together, right? Their existence is finally acknowledged, but they're still separated from the majority group, right? They're still an other. And so in education, and early learning and care is a type of education, this kind of came out of a false belief that what the child needs to learn can only happen with specialized teachers or specialized equipment or specialized activities, right? That it was just better to have them in that separate group. And so that's kind of where separate schools came from. But we also historically see this in segregated schools for Black children versus white children, right? That is a form of segregation. And certainly there's no specialized anything that's required to teach children of different ethnicities. But we do still see segregation today in those schools that are, only for special needs children. And this includes schools for the gifted as well, right? That is a type of segregation, just at the opposite end of what the continuum we're usually looking at. So integration, we're moving up the continuum now. This is physical inclusion, but without that meaningful participation. So we might see this in a school that has a special education classroom in it. I know my high school was like that. We had a special ed room on the first floor, and those kids joined us for assemblies and for some of the big events, but they kind of did their own thing, but they were still in the building. And in the 90s, when I was in high school, that was like a big deal, right? We thought that was inclusion, but it's actually integration. And so this might be also a child in your program or in your home, and maybe they have a support aide, and the child and the aide are kind of doing their own thing, and they're separate from the other children in your activities most of the time. That would be kind of integration. They're not really part of what's happening. So this is a lot to take in. And I want you to think of a time, as we're kind of defining these things, when you either experienced or witnessed exclusion or segregation or integration. And this could be in a school, yours or your child's, maybe in extracurricular activities, maybe in your community. And I want you to think and share in the chat as you're comfortable, what was the impact of being separated by that difference? And how did it make you feel? So feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I'll give people a second to type. What is the impact of being separated by difference? And I don't know, Robin, if it's a separate chat, if things come up.
I don't know if it comes up as a separate. I thought it would just come in the chat actually, but or it could be in the questions. People seem to be putting a lot in the questions.
Okay, I don't see that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
Yeah,
so let's.
neither do
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. So I don't see anything. I cannot, if someone said I can't type in the chat. Okay, you can put in the questions if that makes it easier for people.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just throw it in the questions if that's
Sure.
fine.
And then maybe Robin, could you share out some of what's being said?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just take a look
And
here.
I'll repeat the question. And you know what? I think my chat I can only send to organizers and panelists. So I don't actually think
Oh, you don't have the arrow at the bottom that allows you to do everyone? All?
there's no
No,
everyone
neither
option.
do I.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Lovely technology. Okay. So yes, by all means.
We're secluded here.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Someone's saying loss of learning.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking if they can text their questions here. I'm just gonna say yes, you can. So put them right in the question bar is fine.
That's, oh, yes.
Self-esteem is damaged.
Mm-hmm.
It can lead to mental stress.
Mm-hmm.
What's this? When a child I was supporting was asked to leave a circle because he was dysregulated, I felt like he was othered.
Yeah. Even something as small as an activity, it doesn't need to be the whole program, but just even an activity within a program. It's like, you can be with us for everything except this. Yeah. Othered. Mm-hmm. I think that's huge. And I want to comment.
Separation causes anxiety.
Yeah.
Feeling lonely and isolated, loss of learning opportunities from same age peers.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They feel shame.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling lonely and isolated.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is important. That's perfect. Thank you, Robin. And if there's anything that pops out that's different, that you can maybe share with us in our chat and we can comment on it. But those themes, that's exactly it. And I want to comment on the self-esteem and the mental health and the shame. You know, those create long-lasting impacts, right? The experiences we have in early childhood really kind of shape our how we view the world and how we approach the world as we get older. And if you're feeling othered and isolated when you're young and that's your experience, you start to see the world as an isolating place, and it spirals down into a trajectory that's not inclusive. And it's that otherness, it kind of perpetuates the idea that there's some groups that are better than others or more worth time and learning than others, and we know that's just not true, right? And so segregation and integration, they're often presented as a benefit of those with diverse needs. Like, look at all this specialized support they'll get, and look, these great ratios with 4 teachers and 8 kids, but there's no evidence to support that there's any benefit academically. And we know socially and emotionally there's no benefit to being in a separate group, because these children know. I even had a friend once, and he had this sudden memory. He's like, I had to go to the resource room when I was in grade 1. And I was talking to him about education and different programs, and he's like, my parents thought I was stupid. He was an adult realizing this, right? And so it can come back to haunt people. But there's lots of evidence showing the positive impact of inclusion on both the child with the difference, quote unquote, as well as other children in the program. So what's a better option? Let's look at maybe a better option. Oh, look, there's the question. See, I wanted to pose those questions visually and they were right there. My bad. But let's look at inclusion. So this is where those with diverse learning needs, they're learning and working and playing together alongside their typically developing peers. So that looks great, right? Everybody's all together, we're all in the same circle. But I want you to consider what might be some limitations to this model of inclusion. And feel free to pop your thoughts in the Q&A, and Robin won't read anything out, but do you see any limitations to this?
That's a tough question, Gina.
It is a tough question.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I had to wrap my head around that the first time I was asked that one too.
And you know what? I didn't ever see it on my own, but Shelley Moore has a video on this, and there's a QR code in your handout for this bonus video. And she says this is her model, and she said she got feedback from others, and they were absolutely right. They're like, this is not the best we can do. It is inclusion, but is there something even better than that? And if we look, if you look, there's green dots, and then there's all these mixed color dots, and the mixed color dots are the ones with these perceived differences, but it still shows an other, because there's the green and then there's the mixed, right? It's still separating into groups, even though we're all in the same bubble. And so it's still othering people, and it doesn't actually even acknowledge people with invisible disabilities that look like green dots, but maybe aren't necessarily. So we can all be in the same circle, but that doesn't mean we're all feeling a sense of belonging or receiving adequate support. So it's prompted us to kind of think of one more iteration, and this could keep going. This is the evolution of inclusion. There might be something different 20 years from now. But what if true inclusion recognized all learners as diverse, right? What if changing our practice is figuring out how to connect with each child? We don't need to be experts in autism or ADHD or cerebral palsy, but what if we just connected with each child and figured out what they need for meaningful participation, right? And so just somebody did say in the chat, right, each child's not necessarily getting their needs met, but teaching to diversity might be something to consider. And that's a big question. I want you to hold on to it, because we're going to explore those possibilities. A lot of the questions I ask do not have answers in this moment. They're things to keep thinking about. But for now, just consider, where do you see yourself on this continuum, right? And where's the next step for you personally? And because inclusion is kind of a journey that evolves for each of us. So I want to share a video of what moving in this direction might look like. Now, unfortunately, we had some tech issues with the videos, and so what we're going to do, I'm going to share the link. Well, I'm going to share it in my chat, and Robin, you might have to share it into the Q&A box.
Right.
I'll share the link to the video. There's two ways. We talk about accessibility. There's two ways you can watch this. So you can either click on the link that Robin will share in the Q&A, or you can, on a separate device, scan the QR code that's on the slide and watch it that way. And what we're going to do is just kind of be quiet for, I think this one's 4 minutes while you go watch. And when you're done watching, come back and just put in the Q&A done, so we know that we're ready to keep going.
Okay, did everybody get that link? I just posted it in the Q&A.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So either click on the link or scan the QR code and go watch, and we will come back in about 4 minutes. All right, people should be wrapping up.
Yes, that was amazing, that video. I know people were struggling, and I appreciate that, and I'm really sorry. And for sure, for the next webinar, we'll alleviate this technical issue. We'll come up with a better way of doing it, and I'm very sorry. But we will include that link with the follow-up email as well, so you won't be missing it at all. And it's a wonderful little piece, and thanks for putting that in there, Marilyn and Gina. And certainly, I apologize for not being able to access it during your presentation, but we will remedy that with the follow-up email.
No worries, no worries. And I'm recognizing, I just want to be mindful of time too. So we won't necessarily debrief this. And I want to clarify that even though this was in a school setting, the principles apply for early learning programs and day home environments as well, right? That level of, you know, someone who is with a child, you know, doing everything with them and separate from the group, and the idea of allowing a child to reach their full potential, and are we doing what's in the child's best interest, or are we doing what feels like it's our best interest as we try to do our jobs? And so I want you to consider how this video made you feel about inclusion. How did it kind of make, maybe you were like, okay, yeah, I got this, we can do this. Or maybe it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. I know a lot of time when I share this video with educators, it does feel a little uncomfortable because we're like, how am I supposed to make that work? Like, I love the idea. How am I supposed to make it work and be smooth? Sorry, yes, we're using the term day home, family childcare, home childcare. It's a different terminology across the country. So thank you for correcting the language for me, Robin. So depending on the messages we've learned around inclusion, the messages we've learned around disability or our own experiences, and the resources we feel like we have available to us, we might feel sometimes very confident about what we're doing to support inclusion, and other times we might not feel very comfortable at all. I remember being an educator, trying to support this child one-on-one in the morning routine before he got on the bus for school, and he was a tricky little fellow, and I would cry on my way to the daycare in the morning, being like, I don't want another day of this. And I went to my director being like, I can't do this. I don't know if he should be in our room. And so I remember being in that position, but once we got the right supports in place for him, it was a completely different story, and he was a completely different person. So if you're in a tough place, part of the question that you want to reflect on is, what might it take to feel more confident more often? Some big questions, and that's just objective one. So take a deep breath. Marilyn's going to talk to us now about inclusive culture and what we can do within our power of influence.
Thanks, Gina. And I love that video because it was also a perfect segue, because they talked about that inclusion is a culture, it is a mindset. So we're going to have a chance here to kind of dig into that a little bit. So I just want to talk first about, you know, this idea about getting clear about inclusion. And I think the point of this is really that it's a bit of a personal journey. So like Gina has already talked about, and as you all know, inclusion can be challenging, it can be hard. When we saw that video, we could see clearly that this aide is doing her best in the moment, and yet it's not quite right for that child. So it's not an easy process. And we know that, but we do know that anything we do, any classroom strategies we use, they need to be supported by an inclusion mindset. But we're not going to get that mindset overnight. We're gonna come to it by having our beliefs and our values challenged, and by sometimes having those tearful moments that Gina described and going to someone for support. And so, you know, when I think about myself, I think about lots of moments that happened for me to help me think about inclusion and the importance of inclusion. And sometimes we hear people saying, well, inclusion is right if, or inclusion is right when. And I'm sure I felt that way in my journey as well. But I know one pivotal moment for me was when I was working with a family, and they were looking to put their child in the kindergarten program of the school that their son went to, and they were denied access. They were actually out of the boundaries, and so they were not told that they could not go because their child had a significant disability. And I had just put my children into kindergarten the year before, my two sons, and I could have gone to any school I wanted to. We lived in the same city, and I could have gone to any school I wanted to. And I just was struck by how unfair it was. And, you know, here's this family and this child who I had come to really care about and saw so many strengths and abilities, and they were being denied access. And it wasn't even a question for me. And what was the difference, right? So I think we all come to these moments where we really start thinking, but wait a minute, it's not right, and what can I do about that? And again, some of us may take a little bit longer to get there, some of us will have different moments, and it's definitely a journey that takes some time.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to watch, well, you're going to get to watch, we're going to watch it all on our own, but it's another fabulous video. And this, if you haven't seen it, from Shelley Moore, is an amazing video that really helps explain what we've been talking about here. So again, unfortunately, you'll have to use the QR code. I think Robin is going to put the link in the chat box for us so that we can watch this video and then have a little bit of a chat afterwards.
Yep. Okay, let me just do
Awesome.
that.
Yeah. And this one's 3 minutes.
3 minutes. So again, if you could put down in the chat box when you're done, we'll also be watching it on our own, so we'll have a rough idea, but helps us to know.
Right. Okay, hang on a sec.
Okay, we're getting there.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
I can paste it as well.
There we go.
Right after repeat. There you go. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
And again, if you
Awesome.
can't get it, you can't use the code, not to worry. We will send the links in the email tomorrow, and I apologize for that, but I know that some of you were able to and some of you weren't, so don't get panicked about it. You'll be able to see it for sure. We'll send you the links.
right, I'm assuming everyone is done. I'm hoping so. And I'm hoping you enjoyed the video as much as I did. So I just want to remind you again that this video, she may be talking primarily around education, and we might be thinking around, you know, the K-12 system, but this really does apply to early learning and anyone working in the family day home environment. So what I love about this video is she takes something that seems quite complicated and puts in this great analogy about bowling and reminds us that it's really about our aim, changing our aim. So it's really powerful to think about what can we do different. We can't always change the children in our environments, and nor do we always want to, although there might be some days when we do wonder, but what can we do as the educators to change our aim? And that's really the cornerstone of the work that Gina and I have been doing here in Alberta, is helping educators think differently about their practices. So knowing that when we don't aim just for the middle, or we don't aim just for those children that we notice that are developing in the ways that we might expect them to, but we start aiming for the children that maybe seem to be participating in a way that we have wonderings about. We start aiming for those children, or the diversity that we see. And we start aiming for those children that might have a diagnosed disability, or maybe their behavior is challenging to us. Then we can support all children more effectively, because those practices that work for those children work for everyone. That's that whole universal design for learning. So I don't know if people had some comments watching the video. I know unfortunately, I can't see anyone's comments. I think Gina might be able to answer in the chat box, but hopefully you took some inspiration from that video. But it just really does help us think about a different way of approaching the way we support children. So Gina, I'm going to get you to move forward.
Absolutely. And just as a teaser for next week, we're going to look next week at some of those kind of outside pin practices that support all children. So do come back.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Gina. Okay, so another thing when we think about changing our aim, it really forces us or puts us in a space where we need to think about some of our biases and assumptions. And these are things, biases and assumptions are something we all carry. We may not even know we're carrying them. And if someone brings them to our attention, we might even feel a little bit upset or hurt. But really, it's about knowing they're there. We all have them. They come from many different places, how we were brought up from our own family background, how we might have raised our own children or caregived others in our early careers as educators, even the education that we took. So some of us came to this role as an educator, and we might have taken our early childhood education many years ago. Some have taken it just recently. Some came from other educational backgrounds. And then, of course, there's cultural beliefs. We don't all come from the same culture, so we all have different ways of looking at the world and different understandings. And even families from the same culture will have different understandings. So, and another thing is our hot buttons. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about hot buttons because it might be a term that you're not used to. But hot buttons are those things that a behavior that we might see a child display that just really gets our goat. And so I'm just going to share with you one of mine. So I was an educator working with children many, many years ago, before I knew about these inclusive practices. And when I think back, I know one of my hot buttons, even though I didn't realize it was a hot button at the time, I didn't know that terminology. One of my hot buttons was when I would ask children to do something and they didn't listen, right? So I would ask them to do something, and what I asked them to do didn't happen. So I thought they weren't listening. Maybe I thought they weren't being compliant. I hate to use that word now, but that's probably what I was thinking to my request. But when I really stopped to think about it, and I thought about my feelings, and though my hot button being triggered made me feel ineffective, it made me feel disrespected in some cases. And so when I really think about those feelings and where it comes from and what I can do about that and reframe it, rather than thinking that children aren't listening to me, I have to think about what's my role in that. So maybe they're not understanding because I'm not giving good directions. So I can think of an example of, standing in a doorway, yelling at some children who were outside playing in this gorgeous playground we had and asking them to come inside for lunch. And here I am expecting that they're going to listen, but they're engaged in play. They may not hear my words. They may not know I'm talking to them. So I might have felt frustrated by that, but I was using very poor practices and not being aware of that. So hot buttons are really pivotal for us to think about as we move forward in this. So that's just something that I think we're going to explore that a little bit more next time too. So something to think about. And I think we're going to move on to the next one. I know we're using up all of our time because we've got so many great things to talk about. So this is where we're going to start talking about some of those starting practices. We're just going to think about a place to start and what you can start doing tomorrow or later on this week. So we want to think about 5 practices that demonstrate inclusive mindset. So these are things from the literature and things that Gina and I have learned along the way. And the first one is really important, and it's about presuming competence. It's really believing that children are competent and capable. And we know that that's something that image of the child tells us. And we know that we want to believe that for all children, but sometimes when a child has a disability, that becomes a layer that affects our feelings, and we may not really believe that to be true. We also want to make sure that we're letting the child show us how they are capable, right? And that we're also, when we presume competence, our relationship is with that child and not that aid. So in the video, we clearly, we heard that child saying that their aid was a barrier to their interactions with others. So we really have to think clearly about that. Presume competence. Then we also need to make sure that we're aware of the language we're using. We need to use inclusive and appropriate language. And I know it can be challenging because language changes. It's not always the same. So some of the terms that we might have used years ago are not appropriate anymore. But we need to think about saying disabled instead of handicapped. We need to think about using children's preferred pronouns. We need to think about how we frame our conversation about children whose behavior is challenging to us. So instead of saying a behavior child or a bad child, we talk about a child that's communicating something to us with their challenging behavior. So that's something that we really need to do when we're thinking as an inclusive mindset. And we also need to think about, why do we need to describe children with their diagnosis? So if we have a child in a room that has autism and they love trucks, why do we need to say to someone, my child with autism loves trucks? We can just say that Joey loves trucks, right? So we don't have to always use their disability as a qualifier. We have to be aware of our biases and assumptions. So we talked about that in the last slide. So again, think about your hot buttons. Think about what's really challenging you as an educator and address that. Think about the environment you came in, and think about the culture and the culture of the other children and the educators in your space, and talk to each other about that. So make sure that you're having that dialogue with the people that you work with. And if you're a family day home educator, have that dialogue with the families that you're working with. Make sure that you're just really exploring that. And then another important thing is
consultant if they have one. I know some agencies work like that, where there's consultants to support.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great reminder. Yes, so you're not alone as a family day home educator. You have consultants. You probably have your also circle of other educators to support you. And then we also want to make sure we challenge the status quo. So we all have a different status quo depending on our experiences and some of our biases and assumptions. But some things that might be true for you is, some of us assume that all children have to do the same activities at the same time in our program. So it's time for center time, or it's art time. So is that something that we really need to hold on to, or can we let that one go? And then we need to think about how we communicate with families as a status quo. So we might be so used to just sharing resources in English, but we might have to recognize that a lot of our families are newcomers. So how can we ensure that we're sharing resources in a language that works for them? How can we make sure that the materials in our environment speak to the children in their home language? So just really thinking about doing something different than what you've done before. And then for me, the most important thing is really ensuring that we prioritize and connect with every child and family. So when I go back to my story about my hot buttons and the children that really trigger them for me, I know that I didn't have the relationship I would have liked with those children because I didn't see my hot buttons for what they were, and it really was a barrier. And that also meant that I didn't have a relationship with those families because I didn't have great stories of those interactions to share. So we need to really make sure that we're prioritizing those relationships. And when we have children that we know trigger hot buttons or that we think of their behavior as challenging to us, then we need to make the extra effort. And we also have to think of those outside pins. Are there children in our program who have been diagnosed with a disability, or we have wonderings about their behavior or a possible diagnosis? So those children are going to need some more time from us as well. And so we want to greet each child. We want to spend some time playing alongside with them or observing their play and really getting to know them. So I'm going to move forward. Okay, so over the next week, this is a little bit of a challenge for you. I really want you to think about what your hot buttons are, okay? Think about a child in your program, your day home. What are your hot buttons? And be really honest. I've had educators sometimes tell me that they don't have any hot buttons, and I appreciate, that some of us might have more than others. I mean, I could probably come up with quite a list from when I was an educator, but I think all of us do. It's just only natural to have hot buttons. So really stay in that moment of identifying what they are, and then really think about what assumptions you're making. How are you feeling about those hot buttons? What assumptions are they leading to? What could you think instead? Reframe that for yourself so that you can really support that educator. And then really think about what's one way that I can connect better with that child tomorrow and with that family. We want to build those relationships. And we know that it's not easy. It takes time, but the effort is worth it. It's really important that we really think about children and how we can support them. And I do know from my own experience that when we take the time to do that, we see children in a different light and they see us in a different light. And I can tell you from experience of coaching educators, sometimes they'll ask you to come in and observe a child, and they ask you to notice the behavior that is challenging to them. And I know I've been in this place before, but oftentimes we get so stuck on the behavior that's challenging us that we forget to see all the other wonderful things happening. So change your lens, change your aim, change your view, and it's going to make a huge difference. Gina, I feel like I see you typing away. So is there anything that I should share from the chat box or that we want to talk about?
No, I'm just sort of answering a question.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So it's 6:55 and we're on our last slide. And so this is just a reminder that inclusion is the celebration of diversity put into action. So when we include everyone, then we are respecting diversity. And there is so much diversity out there, neurodiversity, children with a diagnosed disability, so many intersections like Gina talked about. And it really starts with us changing our mindset. And we can do it. It takes some time and it might be hard work, but we can do it. And when we do that, we see that it's not about bad children or bad behavior. It's about what their behavior is communicating. And the challenging behavior is just the vehicle they're using to communicate that to us. So I see that we have a couple minutes left. And Robert, I was wondering, we had a couple of questions that came our way before the webinar started. So one of them was around how to deal with a child with bad behavior. So I was trying to address that already to say that really it's about seeing that it's not a bad behavior. It's communication and understanding what that child is communicating and building that relationship. And then there was another great question about inclusion looking different in so many ways. And how do we know we're doing it when every child is so unique? And they're different in their capabilities and the milestones that they've met. And so for me, I think about participation as being a goal. So we know that when we presume competence, we want to think about children and how they can do things independently, but we also want to think about how can they participate. And that video that we had you watch is a perfect example of that for me, because we saw that child participating with their peers. And then when we have children in settings that are not truly inclusive, that are integrated, they're not participating with peers. And so really, I think our goal is to think about how can we help that child participate. And if they're participating with their peers and they're learning alongside their peers, then we're really doing what we need to do around that. And then there's some other questions about, is this part of the inclusion workshop? So this is it. Yeah, you guys are, I think Gina made that clear at the beginning, they're standalone, but we want you to come to all of them if you're available. And we're really excited to have you here. So I think that kind of brings us close to the end. Robin, is there anything? Oh, Gina's got her finger.
Yeah, there's one question that came into the chat, and I started typing and I'm like, no, I want to speak to this verbally, because Marilyn talked about challenging the status quo, and this might come up from other agencies as well. So this is clearly an educator in Alberta, because they said they had a grit educator working with the child, always taking the child out of the room to work with that child that they were assigned to work with one-on-one, which doesn't sound very much like inclusion, does it?
No.
When we talked about what we were doing earlier, which does go to show you, we're all human. I can't, obviously, without context, I can't speak to what's happening. I don't know that person or that child, but I do know that some staff, right, that organizations hire also have their beliefs about what is inclusion. And so I wonder two things, not having any context, but I think it's important to differentiate a couple things of what is and is not inclusion. So certainly, if you are in an early learning care program and a child has a support staff, like often is the case with GRIT, the EA will follow that child into the daycare center, and they are out of the room for that child's full program time. Absolutely, you as an educator, you can advocate for that child and go to that agency's team, or that team's agency, like go to GRIT, go to whatever the name of the organization is, and say, hey, I'm just noticing this is happening, and we'd really love for Joey to be in the room, and how, like, is this how it works, and tell me more, and what is this? Like, you can bring your concerns to the organization. I know that has been done at GRIT when there are concerns about an EA's participation in an early learning and care setting. We need to know, right? The agency needs to know. Sometimes they're unaware of just what's happening. But I also want to point out, if the EAs may be taking them out for like 15-20 minutes of their kind of 2 or 3 hour program time, like that's how long the EA is there, that might be to work on some very focused, targeted, almost therapy type, right? Because children often have goals around walking or feeding or talking or different things. And so some of those things do need to happen. There's some teaching that might need to happen in a focused, quiet, non-distracting area, or maybe it's gross motor and they just need a long hallway to be able to go up and down, and the classroom's not conducive to that. So it's kind of like learning a lesson. You have to kind of learn it in the classroom before you apply it to life. You did driver's education before you started driving on the highway. And so the EA might be with the child on their own for like 15-20 minutes maybe, practicing a skill. But then the hope, where inclusion comes back, is that when they return to the classroom, that's where the child's practicing the sound that they were trying to make, the motor skill that they were trying to do, whatever it was that needed that one-on-one focus. So there's a difference between working on a skill short term, which just might need to happen outside of the classroom. I think a lot of us work that way. Sometimes, if I have a meeting, I just need to be in a different office space. And so I would not constitute that as exclusion, but I don't know what this was. So but I wanted to parcel that out, because it is sometimes appropriate and needed.
And Gina, can I just make a comment? And then I know, Robin, we have to close. Okay. I just want to say too, I think that when we have a child with a disability in our programs and they have someone come to work with them from outside of our own organization, we need to still work collaboratively as a team. And so sometimes we're going to see things and we're going to wonder. And sometimes our wonderings are natural and they're good, because that person might be learning too and making mistakes. So we always have to say, okay, let's get curious, and I'm going to ask that person, why are you doing that? Tell me a little bit more. So, it's really good, I think, to always take the stance of getting curious, wanting to learn, and also advocating to that aid. How can we include a peer in that? Right? So if they are going out of the room because they're doing some focus work, maybe a peer can be included. If they're going for a sensory break, maybe a peer can be included. So we have to take some responsibility to get curious, to ask the right questions, and to say, how can we include more children in that?
And I think one of my favorite memories from when I was working one-on-one with children, I was working on some very kind of motor stuff. There was some lifting and carrying of a child in a wheelchair, and I was trying to do some things. And I remember the teacher came to me and said, how can I learn how to do that? Because I would like to do that too, so that it doesn't have to just be me. So it could be like, okay, they go out every day for 10 minutes to practice some speech sounds. Could I be the person that does that? Does it have to be the EA, right? Could it be another adult? So also, yeah, inviting peers is fantastic, but also how can we learn the skill so that if the EA is not there, it, you know, it gets passed on. So hopefully that is a long answer to a complicated question.
Absolutely.
No,
and
that
Robin, we could talk forever, so we're going to stop now.
Well, no, I appreciate that. And I mean, certainly it's such a topic that everybody wants to talk about. And there's so many lovely comments. And I will work that out next time so you guys can see those as well. I think it's in closing, I just want to reflect on the fact that the messaging that you've been giving in this presentation, I know in the other two that are coming up, it feels very empowering. And I think, you know, that's the first step for people to dive right into inclusion and ask those questions, ask the questions that maybe make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. You know, if you're wondering why it's done that way, well, then ask why it's done that way, because maybe the other person doesn't really know why they're doing it that way either, you know, and it certainly when it's done in a respectful way, it opens that conversation to do things differently, right? And I really love the piece about teaching to diversity. That really struck a chord with me because I have a child with special needs and it's a hidden disability. So that really rang true for me. And I really appreciated that because connecting each child with what they do need to know and how they'll learn is just so important. The hot buttons, love that. I mean, I have to refer to that in my own life. I've got a lot of hot buttons, so I'm going to reflect on those.
It's common language around grit now. We just say, oh, that's one of my hot buttons, and everybody knows because it's been through everybody.
Seriously, I'm thinking I'm going to use that language with my family. That's a hot button. Don't go there. So thank you for the questions to think about for next week. And I know some people have asked in the comments too. You will be receiving your professional development certificate for this hour of PD. We will be sending those out by Monday. And just so you know, they will be sent to people that have attended the live webinar. So unfortunately, we can't give those out if you're passing on the link to some of your colleagues, which we hope you do. But if they want the certificate for their PD, they have to attend the live event. And there are 2 more in the series on November, I put them in the chat, I don't want to get the dates mixed up. It's on November 13th and the 27th. And we'll be sending out information about that as well tomorrow, actually, with the registration links. And then your follow-up email with the links to the videos and the information about your certificate and all that kind of thing will be coming out by Monday at the latest. So just to make sure everyone will be getting your information, don't worry. And we're so happy you could join us tonight. And thanks to Gina and Marilyn and to Suzanne, my colleague, for joining us tonight as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Everybody.
Have a good evening.